Hi everyone, I'm BJ. I'm a genealogist here in Maine, although I'm also a librarian when I can get a job that way, but different story. But last week when we were having a free-form chat, um, I mentioned a non-population schedule in passing, and Wayne was very nicely the one who spoke up, but I could tell from facial expressions that a couple of the rest of you also weren't quite sure what I was talking about. So I figured, since I'm still haven't had the time to finish the Vital Records program, this one I can do without having to really prep. And so I did not do a PowerPoint on this because I want to help you see, have you follow along as I find, instead of just showing you the page, show how I get to it. And I'm going to try to remember to go slowly enough that you guys can follow along either now or if you decide to watch the recording or if you're only watching the recording. So basically, this week I'm going to talk about the non-population schedules that may flow into next week, not sure. Um, Next week, I'm going to talk about the other censuses that are available, which in the US tend to be state censuses. There's some school census records where towns basically counted and or named all the children in the school district, often clumping them by family. Um, so those are very helpful. And if we have time next week, I will talk a little about very briefly about some things that serve as census substitutes when you don't have a census. For example, there's some early population schedules for places like New Jersey that are no longer in existence. And so there was at one point early in internet genealogy where there was an attempt to use mostly tax records to be a census substitute. For 1890, you get some tax records and you get city directories. And they're not as good, but they can help you fill in the holes um, that are not filled when the census is missing. Does that make sense? What I'm going to show you guys? And again, a lot of this is that 30,000-foot view, but I want you to know what's available. And I'm going to actually start out showing you a couple of the resources that I use when I want to go and see what is available. So let me share my screen and do all the little bits of pulling up things that go away when I share my screen so that I can see if anybody else tries to come in or if any of you put something in chat. So basically what happened is you get the population schedules that I'm sure we've all used. Those are the every 10-year count everybody, every living person in the country. Um, the non-population schedules are looking at other aspects of things. So you get things like the mortality schedules from 1850 to 1880 are for the people who died in the year before the census date. And that's not necessarily a big deal if you're researching in Massachusetts, but if you're researching in Maine, where vital records weren't really kept consistently until the 1890s, having a list of who died and what they died of in the previous year in each town can be a very helpful data point if one of your ancestors happened to die in that 12-month period. There are agricultural schedules. As you can see here, this is the National Archives page about this, that are what they sound like. Manufacturing are for everything from three-person tanneries up through um, the biggest manufacturing plants. around in the 1880s. So let's take a quick look. Um, you guys all know of my love of the Family Search Wiki. And so, in addition to looking by geographical units, from the front, and actually, let me retrace my steps here. So I went to search Research Wiki. And instead of drilling down like North America, US, Maine, Portland, I went here and I put non-population, oops, and I didn't even have to type out all of non-population. And so here we have, this is not as built out as well as I'd like. You're going to find for the most part that you will be wanting to deal with these on Ancestry, where they are in some cases indexed, rather than here where I think they're beginning to get these into the full text search, but I didn't remember to check that earlier. You can, again, you can drill down, if you know where someone was living, you can do state, county, and then town, city, whatever. They do have some of them here. And you'll see, for example, here's one, Hawaii, there's a non-population schedule as late as 1930. Most of these are 1850 to 1880. And as you can see, for example, in this case, Ohio still has theirs. They never sent it to Washington. Um, so, but it gives you sort of a feel for what these cover. But what's nice is when you go down to the bottom and you click on this archives.gov link, that's what got me to this link I was showing you. Whoops, sorry, clicked the wrong thing there. So we'll just click here. And you can see there's information here about what they asked. So, for example, in 1850, they only looked at farms that produced $100 worth or more of product in a year. In 1870, farms of less than 3 acres or that produce less than $500 worth of product weren't recorded. But it will tell you how many chickens they had, how many cows they had, how many bushels of whatever they produced. And again, you get now the manufacturing schedules are interesting because there were attempts at it in 1810 and 1820. But then they then follow the 1850 to 1880. And they did not, they did like the 3-person tannery, but it had to generate at least $500 worth of goods. So if somebody was just tanning what they killed during hunting season and making, selling it to their neighbors for $200 for the year, it's not there. But my couple greats grandfather, where it was him, a son, and one employee one year, that was they made enough material that it counted for this. I mentioned the mortality schedules with some information that would later be standard on death certificates. I talked about the social statistics schedules last week, which is where they look at the number of schools, newspapers, churches, how many paupers, and so on. Um, but you're not getting individual information, but it's very helpful. Was there a church there that year that wasn't there before or after? And so you didn't think to look for it, but maybe it's where your ancestors went. Um, in 1935, those of us who paid attention in history class, middle of the Depression, or as the country is beginning to maybe inch out of the Depression, but not quite. Um, so you get some of these business schedules from the 30s, um, which can be, again, be helpful looking at what were the big employers in an area. Um, and then you get links here by state. So if we look for Maine, um, these are the originals are at the Maine State Archives. They've been digitized. They're at Ancestry now. Um, so, but it tells you which years the records exist for. So, we could also look at Massachusetts, and you can see here, um, there's one difference. Looks like, oh, the Massachusetts Archives doesn't have the mortality schedules, but they are online at Ancestry. Um, but this is just, if you're having trouble reading something in because of the, 1930s to 1960s microfilming that's then digitized, sometimes knowing, okay, I have the reference number, maybe I'll email the Mass Archives and see if it's more legible in what they've got than what is at Ancestry. Um, and there are some bits of references for finding out more. So that's kind of what we're working with here. So now let's go to Ancestry and take a look at some. Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out here at the um, census records at the National Archives, they have blank census forms and charts. So if you're having trouble reading what's across the top of one of these, so let's say for 1850, you can look at this and you can see what's actually there. And I've been known to print these out and use them when I'm working with a family. I ignore this line number and I just start with but I do put in like the dwelling and family numbers and then the names. And I do this less now with, you know, so much online and using software, software program for my genealogy. But if you, I also sometimes like doing this on on paper. They're very helpful for making sure you get stuff in the right columns and all of that. Does that make sense why these would be handy to have?
Absolutely.
Um, I especially, actually, the years I really like them for are like 1830, when you've got
Whoa.
all of these categories where it's just little hatch marks. And you'll notice 1830 was a two-pager. And so here you have free white persons, and then slaves, free colored persons. Um, and then this is a total, and then there's some subdivisions here about like who's blind, who's not a citizen, and so on. Um, but they also have these for the non-population schedules. So, for example, if you want this for um, the mortality schedule for 1870, if you're looking for, if you're like me and have a lot of your family in the same area, I do this and then I just sort of somewhere in here, I put a little indication of which town. And I'll do like three from one town that I'm interested in, and then skip a line or two, and then do a new town. And so sometimes I just put the town name here and then the people, skip a line, town name. So whatever works for you, but this can help you see what you've got. Um, and particularly if you've only got one computer screen, this can be easier than flipping back and forth between the census record and whatever you want to record it in. I find doing this by recording it by hand, I remember it better. And then I also, I'm not trying to do both it, figuring out what it's saying and putting it in the computer program at the same time. It sort of seems like I'm doing something twice, but I find that I have fewer mistakes if I do it this way. So anyway, now we'll abandon the National Archives um, and go to Ancestry. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Search and then Census and Voter Lists. And you'll see here, this is the way most of us use this. We're going to do it a little differently this time. You'll see here we've got two options. We can either do geographically by US, UK, and Canada, or we can do 1700s, 1800s, 1900s censuses. You also get other things like the Indian census rolls that you can look through at. But what we're going to do this week is we're going to do the US Federal Census Collection. And we're still going to ignore this. And we're going to scroll down. And you will see here, these are all of the census sub-collection or collections included in this big collection of US Census records taken by the federal government. Okay? Everyone see where we are, how I got here? I'm not going to really talk about it. They do have enumeration district maps here for 1940. There's a website run by Steve Morse that has them for other years and has them where you can put in an address and it'll tell you which enumeration district it was. So let's start with the one that's going to make a lot of us uncomfortable, the slave schedules. These are sort of halfway between population schedules and non-population schedules. So we're going to go into slave schedule. And what's interesting here, these were only supposed to be done in the South, but notice that we have New Jersey and Delaware. There were still people holding slaves in those states in 1850. So if we go into New Jersey, I don't know which ones of these had, and let's try this one. So in the town of Hillsborough in 1850, there were 5 slaves. 5 people owned a slave each. In Hillsborough, New Jersey in 1850. This is because of
Wow.
what was called gradual emancipation. Um, if you have a Family Tree Webinars membership, Ari Wilkins talks about this a lot. And there's some others that do as well, but Ari Wilkins is great on it. Um, so anyhow, this is, whoops. So you'll notice you just get, for the slaves, you get age, sex, and color. So let's go back to one of the states with many more slaves so you can see how it's different. Let's go to South Carolina. I'm choosing at random here. I'm not picking on anybody, I promise. So here we have a page. St. Helena Parish in South Carolina, 1850. Looks like every single slave on this page was owned by the same man,
Wow.
John J. Smith.
God. Ah,
Um, and so you have the slave, a 74-year-old female who was mulatto, a 71-year-old female who was black, 70 male black. Looks like in this case they did do it by age because we get down here to 20 years old. And this must have been a pretty large plantation. And then we're down to the babies here. And then we go to somebody else. Um, so these are the in 1860s, very much the same. So those are the slave schedules. Let's go back. Let's talk first about the mortality schedules. So, for example, we're going to choose the year 1880. I choose Massachusetts, Essex, and then at this point, you kind of need to scroll through. So here's Lawrence. Let's go a little further. These are indexed, but I'm showing you this way. So we're still in Lawrence, 10 pages on. Up to Lynn. And so you get the person's name, their age, male or female, marital status, no, sorry, color, marital status, where they were born, where their parents were born, profession, the month in that year that they died. Um, this looks like it's brain something. Scarlet fever, dropsy, diphtheria. And it's fascinating to look at these ages. So we have a 79-year-old, a 23-year-old, a 1-year-old, 44-year-old, 5 months, 1, 3, 6, 2 months, 1 month, 4 days, 2 days. So as you can see, you know, this is this really isn't that much different than what you would find on a death certificate of the time for Massachusetts. But if we switch to Maine, yeah, let's do Androscoggin for once. You can see we are here in Maine, the year ending May 31st, 1880. So this is going back to June 1st, 1879. And there's a good chance that a lot of these people didn't have either a birth or death certificate. I do want to do one side thing here for a minute. I'm in a group that we pick through a National Genealogical Society quarterly article every week or every month. I had a really interesting thing come up. And you'll see more about this when I talk about vital records. But they were looking at, this is actually a genealogist looked at a county in Michigan and the death books there, and 414 deaths in the time period he looked at. And courthouse records and newspaper records about death age agree half of the time. The courthouse and the courthouse record in this case means um, the death certificate. Courthouse and cemetery records agree 41% of the time. Cemetery records and newspaper records agree 32% of the time. And the death record, newspaper, and cemetery records, all three of them agree only 25% of the time. So there will be more on this in when I get to vital records and how reliable they are. Um, but I just thought you'd be interested in that difference, that even things generated at the same time. It was actually a pretty simple question the author had. We spent I think we spent more time talking about that and that wishing that we had more of that kind of analysis of how reliable our records um, than we did on the actual question for the article. But again, here you get, the I'm guessing this may be brother, um, two sisters. Let's see what they died of. Oh, no, diphtheria and pneumonia. But both died in November. If they were sisters, I feel really sorry for their parents. Um, but again, look, I mean, it's amazing how many of these, you know, the first one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, three of the first seven are 3 years and under when they died. And five of the seven died before they turned 18. That's a lot of kids dying. Um, and, I'm sure you're like me and you look and you go, yeah, consumption. I don't know what that one is. Um, Lots of consumption. But I mean, tuberculosis killed my grandfather in the 1940s, like 5 to 7 years before penicillin became widely available. So, if you've got people in states that from 1850 to 1880 didn't have good vital records, 10% of the deaths get caught up in this. So that's a handy bit of data right there. So let's go back to previous page. And the real oh, this is one I haven't mentioned before, but that's interesting. There's this period, and again, it's the Victorians beginning to be really interested in public health issues. which is why you get the mortality schedules. Um, this is a census done in the 1890s, um, where you have families with um, deaf members living with um, hearing members of a family. And this is not filled out that well, but some of these have, you know, when they got married, how many children they had, how many died in infancy. Um, if you happen to hit one of these, it can be full of like here, you know, this person has um, his parents' names. Were they related before marriage? They're still living. Here are brothers and sisters. How many were deaf? How many could hear? Um, so you get some good social statistics here. And if you hit a family member that was deaf and it's in a state without good vital records, you may find names for siblings and children that you don't have from other sources. So, and again, with the 1890 census um, not existing anymore, this is right at that same time period. Not getting everybody, but it's getting some people. Does that make sense to everybody? And so you'll see, as you'll notice, this one was done by last name. They sort of they federalized it. So you can go in and look by last name. You don't need to think about where somebody was born or was living. See, here it's choose the first letter. So we could go down to S and then choose SM and then look at all of these people named Small and Smith. Might be worth looking at just to see if it happens to be, you know, your ancestor's sister and her deaf husband. So there's that one. Now let's take a look at these non-population schedules listed here. And this is where we get, so we'll choose Maine, agricultural, industry or manufacturing. It's called different things, different years, and social statistics. If we look at Massachusetts, we have the same choices. So let's look at Maine. Look at agriculture. We'll look at 1860. And what county haven't I used recently? Hancock. And we'll look at Ellsworth because there would have still been farming in Ellsworth at the time. So you start here and you've got, so here we have William March. Oh, Dana's not here tonight. Um, he's got 80 acres of improved land, 20 of unimproved. The cash value of the farm is $2,500. You'll see it's more than most of his neighbors. Value of the farming implements and machinery. He's got 1 horse, 3 milk cows, 4 working oxen, 6 sheep, 1 pig. Value of the livestock is $300. He produced 57 bushels of oats, 30 pounds of wool. And then if we go down, I think it's actually on the next page. So if we then go on to the next page, we find what he's got for peas, and how much you grew in peas and beans, Irish potatoes, they call them. Um, no barley, no wine, no buckwheat, but he produced 150 pounds of butter, $15 worth for the market garden, $25 from the orchard, some hay, and somewhere. Now, I think this is the year. This is the year they just did these across. One of the years they've got like half a page of people, and then they're repeated with stuff, different data for the same people, and so on. But this shows you, it can give you an idea about, if your father or if your ancestor was a farmer, it can give you some idea of like the relative value of what he's producing. Is he mostly a market gardener, you know, hauling things into Portland or Augusta to be sold, or is he basically farming for his family needs? Um, you know, was you see here you have someone who's got a farm valued at $600 versus you've got a couple down here that are 1,500, and then you've got one down here that's only 400, and one here that's 2,000. And here's one that's 3,000. And so the value, the more likely you are to find other records, taxes, um, wills, that sort of stuff. So that's what you're getting with the agricultural schedule. You know, Maine was not producing a lot of wine at this point, but Virginia was. So, and actually we can from here, I guess I put it back to here. So we're going to come back to Maine and choose the industry, and we'll choose 1870. And let's go for Hancock and Ellsworth again. So here's one where you can see, you know, this would have been fun to set up in a modern day Word table or Excel spreadsheet. Um, so we're in Hancock, Ellsworth, Hancock, Maine, and you can see you have someone who's a printer, you've got a tailor, tin plate manufacturer, another tailor, um, someone doing lumber, um, and so on. So what you see here is you get what kinds of machines they have, if any. Um, is it hand powered? Is it water powered? Wind powered? Um, average number of people employed, and you get the materials they've used. So here you get the printers using paper and putting out newspapers. And the tailor is using cloth and putting out clothes. He made 300 suits that year. Here you have iron, cloth, lumber, and he's turning lumber into shingles, boards, laths, clapboards, shocks, shocks. Um, so again, this is insight into their, so like this one here, he's using steam power. when everyone else around him is still using hand power? Is that a difference in industry? Is he forward thinking? Is he doing better so he can buy the expensive new machinery? Those would be questions. If that were my ancestor, I'd start asking those questions. Does that make sense to everybody? How this can be an interesting look at your ancestor's life? And if you have found through other sources, newspaper article, city directory, who somebody works for, you can then look up, because notice you have the employer's name here. Sometimes it's a company name, sometimes it's a person's name. So, and there really were merchants all over the state. Here's another one. Um, so that's the, and you can, if you're staying within the same state, you can click here and change to social statistics for the year 1870. They're all in one book, one volume for Maine. So we'll just do a random page later on. And these forms change a little bit from year to year. And so this one, we're looking at the value of the real estate. You get, you know, are there courts? There's a town library with 75 volumes. Um, there there are there are two Sabbath school libraries, so church school libraries. Um, two private libraries, including lawyers, clergymen. Um, you get the taxation, breakdown by state, county, town, road, and school, average salaries for certain occupations. Over here, you get breakdown of schools. Um, there's an agricultural college here in whichever town. Which town is this? Something in Franklin County, which, and you'll see here these are essentially ungraded common where the one room elementary schools. Um, no private schools, no parochial schools, no charity schools. I'm not listing any churches. Must have been a fairly small town, or periodicals. Let's take a look at one more just so you can see a little variation. Can't read that one either. Okay, so which town is this? Let's see. So this is subdivision number 62. No library, um, no colleges, um, taxation, but they do have three churches, a Methodist, a Baptist, and a Free Will Baptist. So, you know, if you had ancestors in this town and you haven't found much about them, you might want to contact the Free Will Baptist Archive at Bates College and see if they've got any reference there in the Baptist records and newspapers about your ancestor. And notice that they have both Baptist and Free Will Baptist. I'm sure there's a story there. Um, and it's rather unusual that a town in New England doesn't have a congregational church. Um, but this one didn't. So, and you know, you can also not go all the way back. We can go to, um, let's do Michigan. Social statistics. And this town has a Methodist, a Baptist, a Presbyterian, a Congregational, Oh, actually, it's multiples of these. Episcopal, Universalist, German Reformed, Disciples, and Catholic. So there are 35 churches in whatever division. Is this Detroit or something like that? No. Oh, this is for the whole county. So that makes more sense that it's 35 churches for the whole county. 17 town or city libraries. Um, you've got the wages here. Um, so average wage for a farmhand per month living with the family is $16. Day laborer without board is $1.50. With board is $1. Carpenter makes $2.50. Female or per day, whereas a female domestic makes $5 a week. You've got looks like 15 paupers in town or in the county. 8 native born, 7 not. There are 3 newspapers. Again, this can be really handy. Chronicling America does a good job. A lot of local libraries and historical societies do a good job, but it's worth seeing if your ancestor lived in a town with a newspaper that hasn't quite made it into the databases because it lasted for 3 months and it happened to be the 3 months they were collecting these statistics. Um, so that's one of the nice things. So we're now going to work our way back to the federal census collection and scroll down. And the last one I'm going to do tonight is the 1880 DDD census schedule. Defective, dependent, and delinquent. Um, this is the other one that makes people uncomfortable. Along with the slave schedules, there's some language used in some of these that is not language we'd use today. Let's put it that way. So let's go into these. And we'll go to Maine. And we'll look at, where's Cumberland County? Just because I know Portland and such will have a lot of. So let me find the start of a town that's got. Okay. So here we have the start. Oops, is that right? No, let me go back one more page. It can take some maneuvering around in these. So here we have Falmouth. So this first, oh, sorry, that's Yarmouth. Apologies, Yarmouth. So this is looking at the insane inhabitants of Yarmouth. And we've got 3 of them listed, living in Yarmouth, who are not inmates of an institution, mild, short time frame. None of these need to be kept in cells or mechanically restrained. This third one did spend some time at the Augusta Insane Asylum. And questions about epileptic, suicidal, or homicidal. Then lower on the page, we have, and I warned you about the language, remember, the idiots. This is not a term used anymore for good reason. And so you get the names, where they live, self-supporting, age at which the idiocy occurred, um, supposed cause, size of head, large, small, or natural. Been in a training school. It looks like this one is epileptic. So we will go on to the next page where we get, there was nobody who was deaf mute in Yarmouth, nobody who was blind. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. No homeless children. There's one inhabitant of the town who's in the county jail. And then if we look on the final page for the town, we get those who are paupers or indigent in institutions. And so these are all at the Yarmouth Town Almshouse. And you get people there for old age, dementia, insane, and various other questions. And again, you can maneuver through this by going like Massachusetts and Essex. And generally, they are then in alphabetical order. But you'll notice that I say that and then it's not the case here. So here we have Salem, and you get people who were in the insane asylum in Danvers, the next town over. Nobody classified as an idiot. Um, but you do get people who are blind. As you can see, they're named here. Um, one person in prison, and no homeless children. So that's what these are, is this kind of, they did a duplicate here. But this gives you an idea of what information there is on these. So let's just go back. I think I've got them all. Yeah. Oh, the veteran schedules. These are technically population schedules, um, but they are helpful because the the lack of the 1890 census, they were only supposed to record Union veterans, but the further south you go, the more likely it is that the enumerator actually threw in a few Confederate veterans as well. But it gives you um, the man's name. If he had died and his widow was alive, she's listed. His highest rank, what company he was in, regiment, when he enlisted, length of service, and then down to, these are then, this is, their address. So for example, line number 3, who is Louis Selbing, had his arm amputated. And then line 10 had a gunshot in his leg and hand. So Edward Williams. And you know, the vast majority of Civil War pension records are not digitized yet. Um, some of them are for the colored troops and a few other bits, but there's a good chance if somebody's here and alive in 1890, or the widow is alive, there's a good chance there's a pension file. And again, this is one of those cases that for Massachusetts, it's not a big deal. But this in Maine can tell you that these men were still alive. They hadn't already died, and you're not wasting your time waiting for a pension file from DC because the guy's already died, and so there's no pension file. Um, so, and the other thing I've found these useful for is if you have somebody with a common name and trying to figure out which Robert Smith in the Adjutant General's report is the one you're interested in, sometimes this can help because of an injury or the widow's name and so on. Does that make sense? Why they'd be helpful? Here in Maine, we're always working to get around the pre-1892 issues. So that's the overview of these. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, turn my camera back on. Um, and again, I know to get this all in, I could take practically an hour on each one of these. But I hope I gave you enough to show you what's interesting about them, what you might find out, and how to find them. Because so many people never look down at the bottom of that US federal, they find people in the census by searching by name and limiting it by state or county. And they don't see those non-population schedules that, as I said last week, a lot of you are at the stage that I'm at, that if you can find it by putting names in boxes and hitting search, you found it. And so we're now looking for, what churches were there? you know, was there, is there a newspaper that's not on newspapers.com that I need to see if it survives? Is there a Civil War pension file? And so I think these are things that can help you figure some of that out. You know, did your ancestor's sister go blind? Would she have other records because of that? So any questions?
I think you just answered one of mine. So you can't just type in a name in the census and it will find all these things that are in the non-population schedules.
It does sometimes. I am not exactly sure what they've got, ancestors got indexed and what they don't.
Oh,
I try because sometimes I get it popping up and other times I don't, and I don't know what's going on back end with their search.
yeah.
So it's this is one of those, if you're not finding a lot about somebody that you think you should be because you knew he was a farmer with 300 acres and you're not finding him listed in the agricultural, he's not coming up in the agricultural schedule, you then want to go and look for that town where he is and see if it's just badly transcribed. Maybe he didn't own it and it's in there under the owner's name. He may have rented the farm.
Interesting.
Or been a hired hand, but said he was a farmer to his grandchildren. You don't, I'm a big believer, the search functions are great, and all four of the big genealogy websites have improved them greatly in the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, 10 years ago, I would run the same search 2 days in a row in Ancestry and get different answers. But this this is the way of, if you're not, especially if you're not finding something you're expecting to, or you want to see, is a $3,000 farm reasonable for that area, or is it he's the richest guy in town? Is he average? Or, you know, my guess is some of those like 1850, 1860 plantations in South Carolina, $300 for someone who was a farmer in 1850, 3,000, $3,000 probably was nothing compared to some of the big plantations.
Hmm.
Whereas in Maine, it might have been you were the richest guy in town.
Hmm.
So I find, as I'm trying to poke away at things, sometimes that seeing what's going on around a person. Is he the only sheep farmer in a town where everyone else is a dairy farmer?
Hmm.
Um, so, but you know, I start with the magic boxes to search too. But the big thing is when they don't get you what you think you should have. So this is like genealogy 201, 301 of, when you're dealing with the easy things haven't worked. And because of Maine not doing vital records until 1892, we've got a lot of stuff that doesn't come up in magic box searches
Yeah.
because the records weren't generated. Now, you've all heard me say, look for siblings who stayed in Quebec, stayed in Massachusetts, went to Massachusetts, because those had, Massachusetts has 51 years. So essentially 2 generations of vital records earlier than Maine.
Hmm.
And sometimes through some of these, it's where you find sibling data, especially someplace like Maine. You find, who the sibling was. Quebec's got records going back even further with the church
Yeah.
records. So, you know, we're sort of between two places with much better records. um, at least for the 19th century. So think of this as just another tool in your arsenal for finding information beyond the basics.
Mhm.
Because yeah, like those social statistics things, they're not indexed anywhere. You need to go in and find your town or county, the way Michigan did it. Um, so anyhow, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to stop the